Okay, cool. All right, so a few things. First off, welcome. I'm Marissa. You can call me Marissa. You don't have to call me like Ms. Langet or anything. This is my second time teaching this course. It's evolution and behavior. Um, we are going to talk about, we're going to end up going through the entire textbook. I'll go in details more about the textbook. Um, but if at any point during lectures or if you're studying at home, send me an email. I'm pretty available. I'll answer you as quickly as I can. Um, yeah, all right, so let's get started. Oh, also, the other thing. Obviously, there's online students as well. This isn't the whole class. So this camera over here is recording us as we go, which is why I'm sitting, because it can't, there's no longer the top-down view that Echo 360 used to have. We have a different program now. So these videos will be available to you as well. It's all on the Blackboard. If you haven't registered yet, just send me an email. My email will be up here, and I'll register you on Blackboard, because sometimes it takes a little bit for it to go from ViewBrain to Blackboard. Okay, so today we're going to go through the syllabus, which is on Blackboard, but I'm going to break it down pretty much step by step here. And then we're going to go through chapter 1. We may actually finish it. It's a pretty short chapter. And then we'll just see how it goes. Okay, so outline of what we'll talk about for the syllabus today. We're going to go through introductions, both myself and you guys. Go through textbook information, what you're going to expect in class, what I expect from you in class, the attendance and participation policy, which can be a little confusing on the syllabus, so I'll explain that. Chapter quizzes, review sessions, tests, and what's on them when they're given and how they will be given, and then finally computers in class. So, like I said, my name is Marissa. You can call me Marissa. I just completed my 3rd year of grad school, so I'm going to be a 4th year this upcoming fall. I am defending my master's in 3 weeks, so I'm a little crazy right now, but it's fine. This class will go really smoothly since I taught it, like I said, I taught it in the winter, but I also TA'd for this class with Dr. Cameron this past semester, so I know this material pretty well, so I'll be able to help you guys. My office is in Science 4, room 234A, for students who are on campus, even if you're an online student. You can come stop by. I'm there most of the time. I work normal people hours, so I'm here from like 9 to 5 outside of this class. So if you would like to meet with me, just send me an email and I can make sure that I'm available. Also, if you're an online student and you'd like to meet with me, you can send me an email and we can Skype or just talk via email, that's fine. And again, for in-class students, I'm going to be randomly talking to the online students, so don't be weirded out. My email is up there. It's on the PowerPoint, which also PowerPoints will be made available on Blackboard. So you'll have both the PowerPoints and the videos of the PowerPoint and me talking over them, both on Blackboard, just in separate locations. So my email is mlanget1@binghamton.edu. You can send me an email really about anything. I don't care if you have questions about chapters, quizzes, if you have a question about getting into grad school or what you want to do with your life. I'm pretty receptive to questions. Okay, so for the 3 students who are here, would you all like to introduce yourselves and give us a little background? One of David or Son can start.
My name is David. I'm a psych major in my last year.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good.
Chris, neuroscience major, going into school also.
Mm-hmm. And you?
I'm a psychology major. This is my last
Awesome. So yeah, well, a lot of you guys are going to be seniors, especially the online students too. So yeah, if you have questions about your next step or anything, I'm here to help. All right. So the textbook, this should be available through the bookstore. We are using the 3rd edition of the Lee Allen Dugatkin's Principles of Animal Behavior. You can get it fairly cheap on Amazon, or I use half.com. It's like $30 maybe. There is a copy in the library, but it's the second edition, since I don't have the money to give them a textbook. The last teacher who taught it just put the second edition in there. In most cases, that textbook is fine, but there are a few places where something's covered in third edition that it's not in the second. So what I would suggest is grabbing the third edition or finding someone who has the third edition and copying it. I do have an extra third edition that you guys can come to my office and look through if you want. I mean, it's mine, so I still need it. But that way, if you want, you can make photocopies of it or anything like that. And I don't have a preference if you have like an e-textbook or a regular one. That's totally up to you. The class in general is going to be pretty fast-paced. We have like 5 weeks, 4 weeks to pretty much cover an entire textbook. We are going to be covering about 1 to 2 chapters a day. We'll generally finish up the chapter from the day before and start a new one is what ends up being on most days. Especially because there are in-class students now. Ask questions, stop me. While it's a fast-paced class, we have plenty of time to go over questions. I would rather us spend a lot of time answering questions and not finish the textbook than going through the textbook and you guys being confused by everything. So if you have questions, stop me and we can go over it. When we get to the tests, you'll see that we don't have a strict deadline as to what chapters we need to cover at a certain pace, just the dates of your test aren't going to change, just what's on them might be a little bit different. Again, PowerPoints are posted at the end of class. The video lectures, because they have to go through it, the program's called Panopto, and I think on Blackboard the tab is Panopto recordings or something like that. Because it's recorded, in most cases, recorded locally on my computer, and then it's uploaded onto the cloud, and then it gets processed in the cloud, it can take a while for it to be available. So for online students, you've already dealt with this because you're watching it. But for you guys, if you want to see it, it probably won't go up until closer to maybe 3, depending on how fast it goes. I know for a 5-minute video can take 2 minutes to upload, so it takes a pretty long time. And this is my first time using Panopto, so hopefully it works really well. There's cool things I can do with the software later on that we'll try out, but for now it'll just be a straight recording and the lectures. Any questions so far? Okay. So attendance and participation. This is a new component to my class that I didn't do in the winter, and I'm doing it for a couple of reasons. One, there were a large difference between students who came to class / emailed me regularly, their performance on tests versus students that I didn't even know were in the class until I got their tests. Like, I'd never heard anything from them. Everyone who actively participated in my class had an A- or an A at the end of the semester. So I think everyone would like that. So I'm going to sort of force your hand and hopefully make you guys get A- and A's. I don't curve my class, mostly because there's A- and A's, but I'm not going to curve you down either. So if everyone can get an A, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to try to make that happen as best I can. For the in-class students, or if you're an online but you actually attend class, which is totally fine for online students who happen to be in the area, if you do come, tell me your name. I know your name already. Remind me that you're an online student, and I'll count that as your attendance grade. Just you physically being here is enough for me. For online students, there is going to be questions on Blackboard daily. It'll just be a very, very quick question related to something that we went over in lecture. There is one today. I'm going to be a little bit lenient on the first week since I know that we're going to have people adding and dropping, and Blackboard's kind of screwy the first week. But I do want everyone to at least try it out this week. It'll just be like a quick, give me an example of 2 things we talked about. Something, not silly, but something pretty easy to answer. You're not going to be graded on correctness, just on physically doing the question. So basically what I'm going to train you to do is go on Blackboard every day and at least answer the question. And hopefully while you're there, you'll watch the lecture. So you won't be graded on correctness, just simply doing the question. The question will go up at the end of class. In some cases, you might be able to answer it without watching the lecture. I'm not going to make it easier one way or another. But like I said, since the lecture might not go up until 3, I'm not going to make you guys wait, so I'll put up the questions right after. In-class students, you have the ability to answer the question if you want. You already get the point for attendance for being here, but if you just want to know what the question looks like or if you got it right or wrong, you can still answer it. It'll all be on Blackboard and available to everyone. The important thing is that it must be completed before class for online students. I want to make sure that you guys are staying with us as we're going. In-class students, it's easy because you're here. Online students, it's really easy to put all of your lectures off until the day before the exam and then watch like 7 hours of lectures at once, which is awful. And I don't want you guys doing that, but since I can't force you to do that, the best I can do is try to force you to go on Blackboard every day. And the real motivation for you going on Blackboard every day is that for each time you don't do this, you lose 2 points on your average, like 2 full points, up to 10. So if you don't do the question, it can really negatively affect you. I mean, I'll talk about my grading scale in a minute, but you need a 95 to get an A, so you really can't miss too many classes. That being said, I know that things happen, especially because it's the summer. If you have some reason why you can't do the question on Blackboard when it's supposed to be done, just send me an email and explain it. I'm going to be pretty lenient, but I need to know ahead of time. And in most cases, I'll need some form of documentation. Like if you're sick, or even if like you had to go away for a wedding one weekend, like that's, I understand everyone has weddings during the summer. Just send me like a picture of the invitation or something and that would be fine. Questions on attendance and participation. For in-class students, it's pretty easy. Just show up. All right, next is chapter quizzes. So another thing that I've changed from my lectures from last year is instead of having huge tests at the end of each week, I'm going to have slightly smaller tests at the end of each week and chapter quizzes at the end of each chapter. Basically, once we complete a chapter, there'll be 10 to 15, I don't know, it might be less. I haven't fully decided how many questions we'll end up doing. But you'll have about 10 questions, again, given through Blackboard. It's just a little quiz. They should be easy. You can use your notes, you can use your textbook. There'll be multiple choice, true, false, mostly. And this is just really to make sure that you've understood the material of that day, or at least of that chapter that we've covered to that point. This will be graded for correctness, so try really hard. It'll be available at the end of the lecture, and it will be due before the next class. So it's sort of the same timeline as the attendance and participation. If we finish a chapter, so for example today, we will be finishing chapter 1 probably. So there will be a chapter quiz tonight. And as long as you do the quiz for online students, that's your attendance participation. You've gone on Blackboard and I have some way of knowing that you've done that. The nice thing about the chapter quizzes is that the lowest grade of your quizzes is going to be dropped. There are 17 chapters in the textbook. I hope to cover them all, and I'm pretty sure we can. So you'll just have 16 quizzes that will matter. But again, you should be doing pretty well. They're not going to be tricky questions. I've now taught this or made quiz questions for 2 semesters now. I know I'm not going to give you the hard ones that are tricky. They should be simple, and just make sure that you've went over or at least understand the material. Questions on quizzes. And these quizzes are required for both the in-class and the online students. Yes.
I haven't registered for the class yet, so
Yes.
how would I take the quiz?
I'm going to add you on Blackboard physically, because you don't have, I can just add you on Blackboard like right now at the end of class. Yeah. But like I said, for this week, it's kind of like, we'll see how it goes. I am going to assign chapter 1 tonight, probably. And I do expect everyone who is registered to do it. That being said, I'm sure I'll have a new student tomorrow and they'll have a slightly different setup. But I will register you and hopefully it'll go well tonight. We'll see. This is my first time trying chapter quizzes in a class. And since I do care about teaching a whole lot, if you guys have any feedback on things that you like or don't like about the setup of the class, let me know. What we have here is probably going to stay for the whole semester, but I'm probably going to teach this class again, and I would love feedback to figure out what you guys like and don't like. The next is something that I've added from my last semester. We did it last time, and everyone loved it, so I'm hoping that it'll be just as successful this time around. Like I said, your exams are going to be on Fridays, and I'll get into how exactly they're given out in a minute. But I'm not going to teach you new material on the day that you have a test because it doesn't get in your head, and I'm not going to test you on something that you learned that day. So every Friday is going to be a review session. What I have you guys do is all students send me some questions by 8 p.m. on Thursday. I put together a lecture of commonly asked questions. I go through every single question that you've asked me, and I will go into each question in depth. If you ask me the question, I'm not going to be like, oh, figure it out on chapter 2, page 70. I will go through each question and answer it. I will not provide any review questions. So if no one emails me, then I'm not going to go over anything, and I'll just start the next stuff. So please email me. I've never had a time where no one emailed me questions, so I haven't had to do that, and I'm hoping you guys will do the questions as well. Impressively, most students are pretty good at guessing what the questions on the exam are going to be. So if you can guess what the questions are going to be, you can just straight out ask me, and I'll tell you, and then you'll have the answer for later. So use this to your advantage. I really would like to help you guys the most that I can get a good grade. All right, now for the exciting part, the exams. There's going to be 5 exams every single Friday, and yes, there is going to be one this Friday. Each exam is worth 12%. It's a weird number, but it's so the 5 exams overall are 60% of your grade. Depending on how quickly we move through the course, it'll be 3 to 4 chapters per exam. It might be a little bit more. It might be a little bit less depending on the size of the chapters, but probably at least 3, possibly 4. The following dates are the dates of your tests: June 3rd, June 10th, June 17th, June 24th, and July 1st. Those are all the Fridays of this class. The way the exams work are they are short answer / essay questions, really more like short answer. You should be able to answer the questions in like 2 paragraphs at most. Questions are posted on Blackboard immediately following class. They will remain open until Saturday at midnight, and you're required to submit the questions through Turnitin. So don't email it to me. That doesn't count. Through Turnitin. And once it's through there, then you're good. There will be probably maybe at most 10 questions, probably closer to 7 or 8 questions on the chapters that'll ask you to sort of bring the material from the 3 chapters into 1 question. Students tend to do really well in this section. It's not too bad. Again, use your notes, use your textbook. You're given more than 24 hours to work on it. So hopefully it's not too awful.
So there's no in-class exams?
No, there is no in-class exams. If you would like to take the exams in class, I haven't had anyone want to, but if you need to or if anyone, including online students, if you need to take exams in person due to one preference, or if you have some sort of, I can't think of the word, it's like students with disabilities, they have special accommodations, that's the word. If you have accommodations, email me your accommodations if you are one of the students who have set accommodations. But we can always set up a time for you to take it in person. Obviously, I can't give you 24 hours in person, so it would be set to probably a 2-hour period. But if that's something that someone would like to do, that's always an option. This section has to be received on time. If you send it in at 12:01, I'm not going to grade it, and you're going to get a 0. I'm pretty strict on that because I end up staying up on Saturday night and just grading them once you hand them in. So I don't want to wait around any longer than midnight. That being said, the earlier you send them in, the better. I can get you your grades back even faster. The papers need to be typed since it's on Turnitin. Double spaced so it's easier to read for me. APA format, not super strict on this. You shouldn't have any citations. You don't have to find outside material. But if you are taking something from the textbook, if you want like to put in a little quote from the text, just make sure you say that it's from the text. Again, it's submitted through Turnitin. Plagiarized papers will result in receiving an F in the course and referral to the Academic Honesty Committee. I haven't had any students plagiarize, but again, I'm a stickler for this because I know since you have your texts and your notes, it shouldn't be too bad. Please don't cheat. Turnitin is really good at finding out if you're cheating, so don't test it. There is a website that you can go to take a practice plagiarism test if you're not sure if you know all the rules of plagiarism, but basically don't take someone else's work. Don't reword the same sentence. It's still plagiarism and Turnitin can still see it. Just put things in your own words and you should be fine. Any questions so far? Okay. So, like I mentioned before, if you are a student who requires accommodations, let me know. Ideally, let me know today. If you're in class and you have an accommodation, let me know after class, or you can send an email. Online students, obviously, just send me an email, and then we can figure out what will work best for you. If you can't take the test for a legitimate reason, it's sort of like the excused absences if you're sick or something's happening, you need to let me know as soon as you know, and it has to be before the exam so that we can make arrangements outside of the window. If you are sick, I'll need a doctor's note. If you're going to a funeral or someone's died, I need some sort of obituary or some proof. I'm pretty lenient on what documentation means. It just needs to be something written. I've had people who've had to go away for a wedding and they just took the exams on Mondays. So it's fine if you have an issue. Just let me know, and let me know as soon as you know so we can figure out a date and time for you to take it because it's just easier the sooner that I know. Any questions on this? Okay. So now here's the grading scale. This is also on your syllabus. It is pretty high. It's a 95 and above to get an A. And then the rest sort of looks more or less the same. 90 to 94.99 is an A minus, and then so forth. In my class last year, I would say 90% of the class had a B plus or above. I did have a student who, I believe he failed, but he didn't do assignments and he didn't email me or anything. So if you stay a part of this class and you participate, you should do okay. This class is made for people to do well. I don't give bonus points. There's not going to be bonus assignments or anything like that. However, for the review sessions that I mentioned before where you guys send me questions, I do take note of who's done that. And if you're kind of close but not enough to round, I can bump you up a little. So do the review session questions. You don't know where your grade will end up and you might need an extra point to get you to the next level. So do the review sessions. And finally, this is the last one. Yeah, for in-class students, you can use a computer. I don't care. But don't play sounds on your computers. I mean, there's like 3 of you. So don't play games, preferably. Don't text during class. If you get a text and you can just quickly answer it and be like, I'm in class. Bye. That's fine. But I don't want you sitting in class just sending out massive texts because it's super distracting since there's just 3 of you. I can tell if someone's doing something bad. So stay focused. It's a 2-hour class. I don't think we're going to have a break. The class I taught over winter was 3 hours. We used to take a little 5-minute break in the middle. I don't think we'll be doing that, but we'll see. We'll see how 2 hours straight feels teaching. Okay, so that's the syllabus. Do you guys have any questions about syllabus stuff? Okay, so we are now going to go through chapter 1. Chapter 1's really short, so what we're going to do today is just to go through chapter 1. I'm pretty sure we'll finish it, but if you guys have questions, definitely ask, because I think we'll have extra time. I would like to finish chapter 1 today. We don't have to, but I think we will. And then once we're done with chapter 1, we'll break for the day, because I'm not going to overload you with too much information. All right, so chapter 1 is a chapter on sort of an introductory chapter on what is animal behavior. Obviously, in a class called Evolution Behavior, we're going to talk about behavior a whole lot. So it's good for us to have similar background for us to all ask the same sort of questions and have the same lens to look at behavior through. So Dugatkin talks about 4 main types of questions that ethologists, which are people who study behavior, are called. There are 4 main types of questions that every question that they could ask should fall under. They should fall under at least one of the 4 main types. The main types are mechanism or mechanistic, developmental, survival value, and evolutionary history. And I'm going to break down each one of these into some examples. So starting first with mechanism. Mechanistic questions are questions that are looking at what's causing the behavior, what's physically happening in the animal that's making this behavior the way it is. So some examples of this could be in our little picture here, a rat going through a maze trying to find a cheese. You could ask, what sort of hormones are involved in the rat's ability to smell the cheese? Or how does memory or hippocampal connections, which we'll talk about later, much later in the class, how do various hippocampal connections affect the rat's memory on where to find the cheese? So all these questions are going to be things that are happening within a specific organism. What's physically occurring to make this behavior look the way it does? Questions on mechanism. Okay. Next is development. So these are questions that are looking at why does this behavior possibly change as the organism ages, or is it even seen at all ages? Does the behavior occur but at different levels, at different ages? Does the early life environment change the outcomes of different behaviors later in life? So one good example of this is maternal care. A little background on my research, which I forgot to do before. I study with Dr. Cameron. We do maternal care. We study maternal care, so we look at how the moms of, those are Long Evans rats. These are the types of rats that we use. How the moms of Long Evans rats, if they're a good mom or a bad mom, and how that changes how their offspring act later in life. So, for example, in moms that are good moms or moms that spend a lot of their time licking and grooming their offspring, those pups that were licked and groomed a lot will be less fearful in most circumstances. They'll be less promiscuous. They'll reach puberty later in life. So all of these things are happening due to an early life environment change. So all of the questions being like, how does maternal care affect puberty onset would be an example of a developmental question. Okay. Next, we have survival value. So is this behavior vital for survival? And survival is sort of a heavy word. Survival in the context of our class means more than just physically living. It also means having successfully mated and passed on your genes to the next generation. So something like the peacock, which we'll talk about a whole lot because it's a great example for a lot of different theories. This would be a male peacock. The males are the ones with the colorful tails. So if you look at the tail from purely a like longevity of their life, like how long are they going to live, the tail is not good. It's really long, it's cumbersome. When they're running, if someone's trying to eat them, they're running, they can just more easily stop them by just grabbing their tail. So it's sort of a hindrance. However, if you look at it from the lens of mating success, for peacocks, the better the tail, the more brightly colored and the larger it is, the more attractive they are to females. So even though from a purely lifespan perspective, a long tail might be a bad thing, it's actually a good thing if you're looking at mating. So the question could be, how does the intricacy of the tail affect the likelihood of mating? That would be an example of a survival value question. Okay. Next, and the final of the 4 types of questions are going to be evolutionary history. These are questions that are generally more like, why does this behavior exist? You're looking at why a certain behavior exists over a longer period of time. So not just why is this behavior occurring in this individual, but why is this the behavior that occurs in this individual based on what its ancestors have done. And the image you have here is a phylogenetic tree. It is sort of looking at how various species, which are the names on the right-hand side, how various species, which in this case are all birds, are related based on specific traits. So in this picture, the blue sort of highlight over the lines is showing that there is a backward stance present. And you can see in most cases, once there's the onset of the backward stance, which is that A up there, that trait continues on, with the exception of the white-crowned manakin, which is at B, they've actually lost the trait. So questions that you could ask for evolutionary history could be, when does this behavior first appear? Why would this behavior first appear in an ancestor? And then also, think of a good way to say it. How likely would this behavior be to continue in the future as well? So next, we have your attendance question. Since I think we're going to have the chapter quiz tonight, this isn't super important and it won't actually count. But in class students, I still want you, we're going to go around the room and talk about them. So the question for today is, give me 2 specific examples of types of questions we can ask about behavior. So an example of what I'm looking for is, like, what occurs in the mouse to motivate to find cheese in a maze? So can you think of any types of questions like that? It can be mechanistic, developmental, survival value, or evolutionary history. And you can talk about like dogs, or you can pick a species and talk about it. You can do literally anything. But I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it, and then once you think of something, raise your hand and we'll go through the room. I just want one from each of you guys. Anybody got any examples? I'm going to make you all say something. So. Go ahead.
Okay. I guess what occurs is in the brain of a dog or something when you pet it and its tail wags.
Yeah, that's perfect. So that would be a mechanistic question or a mechanism question. Good. All right. David or son?
Is it okay to ask how the wolves make their society?
Yeah. Oh, that works. Depending on how you would word it, that could be an evolutionary history question, or it could be survival value. But that's a good question. All right, David. It's all down to you. Pick a species and think of the behavior it does and ask about it.
How does barking in dogs help it survive?
That's good. You can literally ask anything for mechanistic questions. Okay, so good job, everyone. The next thing that we're going to talk about is now that we've had these 4 types of questions, how do they sort of relate to each other, and how can we use them in different ways to figure out what's happening with behavior as a whole? So we're going to look at them from different levels of analysis. The first level would be approximate analysis. These are looking at the immediate causes for the behavior. So what's currently happening in a specific individual or number of individuals that are making this behavior occur. The second level of analysis is ultimate analysis. This is what are the evolutionary behaviors, or evolutionary forces that have shaped this behavior over time. So the main difference is what's happening right now in proximate analysis, and then what is happening or what has happened in the past to make the behavior look the way it does now. So approximate is looking at current causes, and ultimate analysis is looking at past or evolutionary history causes. So what we can do with these 2 types of analysis is we can break them down even further and looking at each of the 4 categories that we talked about, or each of the 4 types of questions we talked about, and putting them in one of the 2 categories of either proximate or ultimate. So the first one is mechanism. So do you guys think this would fall under proximate level of analysis or ultimate? Yeah, so you're asking what's currently happening within the body, what's happening in the hormones or the brain connectivity that's making the behavior do what it does. Next, we have development. So what do you guys think development is?
What was the second one? Ultimate?
Yeah, it's proximate or ultimate. It's actually proximate, but I understand why you put ultimate. So because it's happening within just one individual as it ages, it's still considered proximate. It is over a longer period of time, but even if you're looking at like the mom looking and grooming the individual differently, you're still looking at one individual, which is why it's still proximate. Okay. Questions so far? Okay. Next, we have survival value. So do you guys think this is proximate or ultimate? It is, depending on the question you ask. In most cases, it's going to be considered ultimate. It does get a little tricky because in some cases you are asking about a specific individual. but it is really, why is this behavior, how does this behavior increase survival value? Because that's most likely what happens. How does it increase survival value? And what you're really asking is, what has led up to this behavior being present now? And then finally, evolutionary history. Proximate or ultimate? Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, it's kind of the definition of an ultimate level of analysis. It's looking at how the behavior has changed based on what happened in the past. So in every single case of an ultimate, of an evolutionary history question, it's probably an ultimate level of analysis. So you'll notice in your textbooks, as you go through reading more and more of the chapters, Dugatkin will bring back the idea of proximate and ultimate levels of analysis throughout. And it is something that you're going to be tested on in the various tests and quizzes. So make sure you know the difference between what would be a proximate explanation for why a behavior is occurring and what would be the ultimate explanation for the behavior. And in most cases, there's going to be both a proximate and an ultimate explanation for a specific behavior. Okay, so now that we've talked about what kind of questions we should ask, or we can ask, we should go and actually define what behavior is. There's a bunch of different behaviors, or a bunch of different definitions that Dugatkin gives in his text as what different ethologists think definition, what the definition of behavior should be. But this is the definition that he gives that he feels is the most complete. And this definition is that behavior is the coordinated responses of whole living organisms to internal and or external stimuli. So it's basically a reaction of an individual to something that's happening either within themselves and their hormones or externally, like a predator or something like that. Now we've talked about 4 types of questions and 2 levels of analysis. We're now going to talk about 3 foundations of behavior. These are going to be chapters that we're actually going to talk about in the upcoming weeks. Each one of these is its own chapter. So what we're going over today is very, very lightly dusting the top of that topic, just to give you enough to sort of understand where the rest of the chapters are going. Since these 3 theories are going to be important for each behavior that we look at, even before we really spend a whole chapter talking about it. So those 3 foundations are natural selection, individual learning, and cultural transmission. The first one we'll talk about is natural selection. The definition for this is the process whereby traits that confer the highest relative reproductive success on their bearers and that are heritable, that is, can be passed down across generations, increase in frequency over generations, which is sort of a mouthful. Basically, natural selection is the traits that help an individual reproduce or survive get passed down since they lived and they were able to pass them down. And since traits that would be bad would lead to the individual's death, those aren't going to really be occurring over a long period of time. So the good ones get to increase over generations. And this is all based on genetics. In future chapters, we'll talk about alleles and dominant and recessive genes, but just for right now, just know that this is related to genetics. So there's a few different examples that we can talk about with natural selection. I mean, there's almost an infinite number of examples, but there's 2 that we'll talk about. One we've already discussed a little bit, which is the peacock. Again, the feathers of the peacock are attractive to the females, but it's also a hindrance because it makes them easier to catch. It's harder for them to run if they have all that baggage in the back. Oh, I hate when it does that. I think if we walk on, so the peacock baggage, it's a hindrance, but it's also something that their mates find attractive. But if it was something that was really bad, like if its hindrance to its life was really, really great, it wouldn't still be around. If it was, if it made it so much easier for, let's say, like, I don't know what the natural predator of a peacock is. I don't know, some sort of like lion or some big cat was able to catch it a lot more frequently. Those peacocks that had really, really big tails would be easier to catch and they would die off. And then you'd end up with peacocks with little tiny tails or no tails at all. But since that's not the case, it means that there's something there that, while might seem like a hindrance, overall it's a positive trait since it's been there over generations. And we'll talk about it a lot more in the natural selection chapter. Another example we can look at was the one that they've used in their textbook about xenophobia. And xenophobia is simply fear of strangers is the definition. And the xenophobia they talk about in your text is with the, I think it's the common mole rat. And this is a xenophobia. The xenophobia could be due to environment, is what they're actually looking at, in that in areas where there's a lot of food, they might be less xenophobic because they don't have to hoard their resources as much. So what they looked at is the common mole rat. They looked at a couple different, they looked at two different groups of mole rats. They looked at mole rats who came from an arid environment, which is like a desert. There's not going to be as many resources, versus a mesic environment. And mesic is really just like a richer environment. So there's a lot more food for them there. So they have the two groups, the arid and the mesic. The arid on this is the green, and the mesic is the orange bars. And what they were looking at is how males and males from different groups interact, how males and females would interact together, they're from different groups, and how females and females would interact from different groups. So the idea here is, especially in common mole rats, they actually, once they're old enough to mate, they tend to leave their nest and find a new one. They move around a lot. So there can't be too much xenophobia because that's how they mate. They need to be able to meet strangers and mate with them and have offspring later on. But at the same time, if a group is too open to strangers, they could be overrun with a bunch of random mole rats eating all their food, and that would obviously hurt them in the long run. So what the study looked at here is how different males, female, 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 male, female groups look towards each other. And they found in the male males and the female males, the male males and the female and females, so the same-sex groups, they were a lot more aggressive towards each other. In the just one overall, but also the arid environment was much more aggressive than the mesic environment. So sort of what we would have expected. If you don't have a lot of food, you're just not going to be as welcoming, especially to a same-sex individual, since you can't mate with them. So they're not really offering much to you. And in contrast, if you're looking at the male-female interaction, while the arid environment males and females were more aggressive overall, they were still much less aggressive than either the same-sex pairings. Since they can mate together, there's some value to having a stranger get to help out their gene pool a little, and like I said, they do mate outside of their home colony, so it's something that they have to look for anyways. So that would be an example of how natural selection being selecting for xenophobia or not, can interact with your environment. Questions on common mole rats and aggressiveness. Like I said, we're not going to go super far in depth on natural selection or any of these topics today, since they're entire chapters later on. I just want to make sure you guys have a little bit of knowledge about everything before we get into the nitty-gritty of the class. So the next of the 3 foundations is individual learning. And this is the altering of the frequency of behaviors displayed within the lifetime of an organism. So this is learning on an individual level. This is how new information is processed and used within an individual. We'll talk about cultural transmission in a minute, which is very similar. But this is just how one individual takes in all of the cues, all of the stimuli of their environment, and makes decisions based on it. And how those decisions can change the sort of behaviors that they show over time. Often, natural selection and individual learning can overlap. We'll talk about this much more in the learning chapter, which I think is like chapter 6, so probably not until next week. But the ability to learn is actually something that natural selection chooses for. So in these cases, you're going to be looking at individuals that are capable of learning, but are presented various tasks and need to determine, in most cases, what's the best option for them. So here's our example for today for individual learning. So we have a female, the brown individual is the female, and it's the same female through all 4 panels. And we're looking at how she mates with various males, and then in the end, she needs to determine who she'd like to mate with again. So the first time she mates with male 1, and they produce 1 egg. She mates with male 2 at time 2, and she produces 4 eggs. And finally, the next time she mates with a different male, male 3, and they just produce 2 eggs. So if you guys are female 1, who would you choose to mate with? Assuming that your choices were the same, males 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. So he made the most eggs. Together, you guys laid the most eggs. In most cases, that's the best. You want to have as many offspring as you can. We're to assume that all of these offspring live. So if she laid the eggs, they all survived. So, and we'll talk about fitness and things in a little bit. But it is generally thought to be the best to have more offspring. So she would choose male 2. So at this final panel, she would then choose male 2, which is showing that she took in the information that she gathered over time, that specific males were more likely to give her more or less eggs, and then it altered her behavior in that she chose male 2 again, since he gave her the largest clutch. Questions on individual learning? Next, we have cultural transmission. Definition of this is situations in which animals learn something by copying the behavior of others through what is typically referred to as social learning. Cultural transmission can allow newly acquired traits to spread through populations at a very quick rate, as well as permit the rapid transmission of information across generations. So this is a mouthful. It's really all it's saying is that information is being passed between peers and across generations. So from like parents to offspring. So based on this, how does this differ from individual learning? So how is cultural transmission different than individual learning? Mhm.
Instead of learning from your own experiences in life, you're learning from maybe someone else's experiences.
Yep, so you're taking information. You are again gathering information, but what's happening is you're letting someone else's experiences, what someone else has done, and you're taking that information and applying it to your own life instead of having to live it yourself. So in this case, we're going to look at rat foraging behavior. Basically, it's kind of hard to see up there, but really you have a bunch of rats. You have a demonstrator rat, which is just the rat who's physically doing the behavior. It's kind of the grayish rat. So let's say they normally eat just sort of like leftover garbage. But today, this rat found a hot dog. It's never seen a hot dog. It's never seen anyone ever eat a hot dog. It's totally new. This rat decides, you know what, I'm going to eat this hot dog. I'm real hungry. He eats the hot dog. And he's out. He goes back to his little colony, his nest, smelling like hot dogs since they keep their smells pretty good. And rats have an excellent sense of smell. So he comes back to the colony, smelling like a hot dog. His colony mates, the observers in this group, and also the next generation, can all smell him. They can investigate. Rats don't really talk, but they can get information from each other based on how they're acting and what they smell like. So the other rats are like, oh, you smell like, I guess, a hot dog now. They can smell this new smell. They realize in some way that he probably ate that, and now they can see if, like, how this works out for this guy. Is he going to get sick from the hot dog? Is he going to die? Or is he going to be totally fine? Depending on how it goes down, the observers learn something. So if the demonstrator eats a hot dog and he's totally fine, loves it, the observers are more likely to smell this hot dog, find a hot dog, recognize the smell, and be like, hey, that demonstrator ate it and it was okay, so I'm going to eat it, and hopefully it'll also be okay. And conversely, if the demonstrator dies or gets really, really sick from it, they can associate that smell of the hot dog with their friend getting really sick, and then when they see the hot dog and smell it, they're like, oh God, no, that reminds me of when my friend got sick, so I'm not going to eat it. So this is one rat's experience sort of fanning out through the rest of his group. And it can happen across peers, so you and your friends, you and your buddies, or it can happen, so maybe this rat had kids or had pups, so their pups could gain the same information. Questions on cultural transmission? Okay, so these three foundations of behavior are going to be something that we'll talk about a lot in the upcoming chapters because they are, I think it's chapters 4, 5, and 6, maybe? 3, 4, and 5, something like that. So they're going to be coming up really soon, and we're going to spend entire chapters on all different terminology for that and various examples. But even after we've passed those chapters, they're going to continue to be really important for all the future chapters. We'll talk about foraging behavior and how different foraging behaviors can be transmitted culturally, or how an individual can learn what patches are better, or how natural selection can select for individuals that are better hunters in general. So all of these foundations really are foundations for the entire class, not just behavior study in general. All right, so I have another numbered thing. So we had 4 questions, 2 levels of analysis, 3 foundations of behavior, and now we have 3 approaches to ethology. And again, ethology is just the study of behavior. The 3 approaches here are conceptual, empirical, and theoretical. And we're going to go through each one of them individually. That being said, like the picture suggests, ethology isn't made of just one of them. In most cases, it's really a culmination of 2 or more, all 3 potentially, to give you one example or one theory. So the examples that I'm going to go through are really close to being solely just one approach, but there are hints of other ones in it. And we can talk about that as we go. So the first one we'll go through is the conceptual approach. This is the integration of seemingly unconnected ideas and the combining of them into a cohesive concept. So the specifics on what we'll talk about here is going to be, we're going to talk about fitness or kin selection. So we're not going to talk about what specifically is important in selecting kin, but we'll talk about the idea behind it. And we will use, or you can use, genetics math as an example, but we're not going to actually go through the math of the work. So the example we'll talk about here is fitness. Then that's simply an individual's reproductive success. If you're looking at direct fitness, also known as Darwinian fitness, that's just simply the number of offspring an individual had. So if I had 4 kids, my fitness would be 4, except 4 kids. If I had 8 kids, my fitness would be 8. So basically, it's simply the more kids, the higher the fitness. However, Hamilton, and we'll talk about him a lot, but just briefly, Hamilton suggested that not only are your offspring important, but your relatives' offspring are important as well. And this led to the idea of indirect fitness. And that's an increased reproductive success in an individual's relatives due to that individual's actions, also known as babysitting. Basically what's happening, hopefully these markers work. They didn't work. Okay. Yeah. All right, so direct fitness would be kind of hard to see. Oh, that's like awful. All right, can you guys kind of see it? The online students aren't going to be able to see it, but can you see it? Okay. So direct fitness would be if you're, let's say you're a lady, and you're individual X, your direct fitness would be 2. So you have 2 kids. But if you, so you're that lady again, you're married, you got 2 kids, and you also have a sister now? And she has a kid. If you helped raise that kid, so like let's say, we'll use humans as an example because it's probably easiest. If you help, so let's say your sister's a single mom and she has a kid. So you let her and her kid live with you for a while. So you help her raise her kid, you help feed them, because your actions have helped your sister make sure her kid grows up. Her kid counts towards your fitness. She doesn't count fully, because really what you're looking at here is how closely related you are to the individual. But that's something that we'll talk about in later chapters. But you could say that she wouldn't count quite as much. She ends up counting a 4th. Again, we're not going to get into the math. So now your fitness, you still have 2 direct fitness because you still have 2 kids. But you also have this extra little bit. So you have your indirect, which would be, like I said, 4. Again, don't worry about the math. Just know that it's not as much since you're not as closely related to your sister, or to your sister's kid as you are to your own. So this is an example of a conceptual approach, because really what happened was Hamilton was looking at how we calculate direct fitness and thinking about just, okay, if we're worried about your genes getting to the next generation, it's not the full picture if you're just looking at your offspring, because you're related to your sister, you're related to cousins, and if you have some sort of action on their ability to have future kids, you should get some of those points for it. Again, this is all conceptual. There's not like an actual points game, and these numbers don't really necessarily mean much. But they are a good way of looking at how impactful an individual can be in a group or something like that. Questions on conceptual approach? Okay. Like I said, we'll talk about indirect and direct fitness a lot more. There's a whole chapter that we'll talk about it in, but this is just to give you an example of what a conceptual approach would be. Next, we have theoretical approach, which is the generation of a mathematical model for the world. It's not expected to perfectly fit the real world. You're not trying to find a behavior and perfectly replicate it into a formula that takes account of everything. What you're trying to do is take the behavior and make a model, make a mathematical equation that works in most cases, that gives you sort of the most information with the least amount of variables that you need to worry about, because you want it to be usable. So in our case today, we're going to talk about how does an animal choose what to eat. So turns out it doesn't matter how often it sees a food, it just matters how often it sees better foods, which we wouldn't be able to know that, because you would think, oh, if you're starving, you're just going to eat everything that you see because you're starving. But really what's important is the quality of the food as well. This equation is not important right now or ever. We're not going to have you guys do math equations or anything like that. That's not really important to this class. But just know that this is an example of the theoretical approach, looking at how often, for example, a cheetah chooses to eat a gazelle over an antelope or an elephant or something like that. And the important constraints for this is that how often or how much time does it take to even find this prey? How long does it take to catch the prey? And then also how much energy does it take to catch the prey? So again, it's not important necessarily the theory itself, but knowing that there's all these different constraints that a researcher or an individual would have to put together to come up with this mathematical model that can be used in most cases. So you can look at, oh, okay, a fawn is, on average it takes this much time to find one, it takes this much time to catch one, and this much energy to, chase after and everything. You can give it a value. You can then compare that value to the value of an elephant or an antelope or anything. And then now with these values, you can really compare the different types of prey items instead of just being like, oh, well, they see antelope all the time, so it's probably just an antelope. You have a little bit more information. And again, it's not a perfect representation of the real world, but it's a really good start. Questions on theoretical approach? Good. All right, last one and our last slide, so we're getting out of here super early today, is empirical approach. So this is all observational and experimental studies. An observational study would be if you went to a marsh every day, or if you went to the nature preserve here, and you wrote down what a specific species of bird does. So you follow around a group of birds and you're like, oh, they're in their nest right now, oh, they're foraging, they're flying around, whatever. Just write down everything you see. You collect that information about foraging behaviors, and also you collect about predator density. So is there, a fox nearby? Is there a hawk or something that actually eats your species that you're looking at? And then you find that there's a correlation between foraging and predator density. So they forage more when there's less predators. Can you say that predators decrease foraging behavior? What do you guys think? Nope. It could be one factor. You don't know for sure because it looks that way. But because you haven't influenced it at all, you don't know if it's could be, maybe it's actually if the sun's really high, there's more predators and they forage less. It could be something completely different because you've only looked at two factors. In order to confidently say that predators decrease foraging behavior, you would need to experimentally manipulate the environment. So, another question. How would you guys test this? In a lab, probably. What sort of criteria would you use, or how would you set it up?
Are we testing the question, predators decrease foraging?
Yes. Yes. How would you test that?
I guess just you keep the food constant, and I guess you keep like where the food or how they can access the food constant, and then you just introduce a predator.
Yeah, so you could have like two groups, one that has constant access, or they all have constant access to the food, but one group never has any predators, and then the other group has a lot, and you could have a third group that has just a little bit of predators. You can change up the density and see, oh, there's more or less foraging in these cases, and then you would be able to say that predators decrease foraging behaviors. And it is true that for most species that is the case, that predators, once an individual has seen the predator, they're less likely to start foraging because it's a very foraging can be a very costly behavior. They have to move around, get the food, and they're generally out in the open in some way. And if they're using the energy there, they're not going to have as much energy to fly, run away, swim away from their predators. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. There will be a chapter 1 quiz tonight. I'll put that up shortly after this class ends. But do you guys have any questions about anything at all? Chapter 1, syllabus, literally anything before we go. Because we have a lot of time.
When quizzes due?
Quizzes are due before class the next day. So I will send out an announcement on Blackboard when they are available, and then the Blackboard quiz will automatically close class starts at 11:30, so it'll close at 11:30 the next morning. So that'll all be up on Blackboard. Oh, I didn't mention this before because I didn't use it last year. There is a discussion board available for you guys to use on Blackboard if you want to talk to people, like online students. I know I had a couple students use it to find people's notes if they were absent, or have little mini study groups. But I never use it, so it's not a good way to contact me. But if you guys are wondering, how have you guys been studying, or more for the online students, you can find out where everyone else lives. There might be someone near you that you can meet up with and have study partners. That's probably the best way to find everyone else. I'm pretty sure you can find everyone's emails though on Blackboard as well. And you can always email each other. Email me. I don't know where you guys live, so I wouldn't be able to help set up partners. But if you're interested in that, I can make a little document and we can figure that out. But any other questions? Okay. Most days we will go the full time, but I'm not going to start chapter 2 for you guys. That's a lot for your first day. So with that, I'm done. So good job, guys.